Hi everyone, welcome to the video over completing the square. So first off, we're going to start when a equals 1. That means in front of the x squared that there's only going to be a 1 there. Okay, so we're going to basically rewrite this into vertex form. So step number 1 is we are going to add in our spaces. So we add in our first space after the second term. So that's going to be after the 8x. So I'm going to put a plus space. Then we are going to add it in after our last term, but this time it's going to be a minus space. Now both of these spaces will end up being the same number. Okay, and so since we are adding and subtracting the same number, we are not changing anything about the equation. Okay, but it allows us to rewrite this into that vertex form. So now what we're going to do is we are going to take this middle term right here and we are going to divide it by 2. We are going to half it. And you include the sign. So it is a positive 8 divided by 2, which gives me 4. Then what we're going to do is we are going to square that term. So we are going to take 4 and square it, which gives us 16. 16 is the number that goes here and here. So now what this allows us to do is it allows us to take these 3 terms right here and factor it. So this first time I'm going to show you how to factor it, and then the second, and then after that we'll just do the shortcut. So if we factor this, x squared plus 8x plus 16, okay, and we see that there's no greatest common factor, so we go to our x. The 16 goes on top, the 8 goes on bottom. We think to ourselves, what can we multiply to get 16? Add to get 8. We see that it is 4 and 4. 4 times 4 is 16, 4 plus 4 is 8. Then we can write it out as x plus 4 times x plus 4. Well, when we have the same factor multiple times, we can rewrite it with an exponent. So it would be x plus 4. And since I have 2 of them, it's going to be to the second power. So what that allows us to do is now that we have it factored, I can show you the shortcut. So the shortcut says that you're going to have something in parentheses squared. You're going to use whatever variable is in your equation. And then you're going to use that half term plus 4. And so notice how it's the exact same thing that we got over here. Then all you're going to do is take these 2 numbers that are off to the side, and you are going to add them together. So 7 minus 16, that is a negative 9. And this right here is our equation in vertex form. It is the exact same equation we started with, it's just written in a different form. And that's all we're focusing on in this video. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to part B. What we're going to do is first add in our spaces. So I add in a space after that negative 6x, and then after this positive 15, I subtract a space. I'm going to take that middle term. I'm going to cut it in half, which means divide it by 2. So the sign is included, so it is a negative 6 divided by 2, which is a negative 3. Then I am going to square it. So I'm going to take negative 3, and it needs to go in parentheses, and the squared on the outside of the parentheses. And negative 3 squared is negative 3 times negative 3, which is a positive 9. So a 9 is going in this space and in this space. So now we can go to our shortcut. The shortcut is factoring this part right here. Okay, so we don't have to factor it. So that would be something in parentheses squared. You take your variable, and then you take your half term, which was a negative 3, so x minus 3 squared. There we go. We factored what I have boxed in blue. Then we take this right here. We add it together. 15 minus 9 is a positive 6. And that right there would be the equation that we started with written in vertex form. So let's do another one. If you want to pause the video and try it yourself, you can pause the video and try it yourself. So here we go. First thing we do is we add in our spaces. So my first space goes after the minus 5x. My second space goes after the 1, and we subtract it. I am going to take this middle term right here. I am going to, divide it by 2. So I'm going to cut it in half. And -5 over 2 is just going to stay -5 over 2. I want to leave it as a fraction. Okay, then I am going to square it. So when I square it, -5 over 2, I square the top. So -5 would be 25. I forgot to write the squared. 2 squared is 4. So there we go. We have 25 over 4. 25 over 4. You could also type that into your calculator if needed. Then we go to our shortcut. Our shortcut says we have something in parentheses squared. It's going to be our variable in our half term minus 5 halves. And then we are going to add those last two numbers. Now, in order to add fractions, we have to have a common denominator. So you could type what I just highlighted in purple by itself in the calculator, or you can do it by hand. To do it by hand, I need them to both have the same denominator. So I'm going to rewrite one as 4 over 4, and that allows me to subtract 25 over 4 from it, and it gives me negative 21 over 4. So minus 21 over 4. And that right there would be the same equation that we started with, written into vertex form. Okay, so that was example 1 where all of our A's were 1. Now in example 2, the A's are not going to be 1, which adds a couple additional steps. Okay, so this is when A is not 1. So if we look at this, we have f of x equals 4x squared minus 4x plus 5. We still start by adding in our spaces. So plus space after the minus 4x plus 5 minus space. Now what we have to do, because there is a greatest common factor right here, we are going to factor that out of the first 3 terms like we would if we were factoring. So my greatest common factor is 4, which leaves this as x squared minus x plus space, and then we have the plus 5 minus space. So now I go back to doing the same thing. I'm going to take this and cut it in half. Well, what number is that currently? That is a -1. So we are going to take half of -1, which is just a -1/2. Then I'm going to take that number and I am going to square it. -1/2 squared. -1 squared is 1. 2 squared is 2. So that is what goes in this space only. Before I can write anything into this last space, what we have to do is we have to distribute this 4 back out. Oh, and I wrote the wrong number. I'm sorry. 1/2 squared is 1/4. There we go. That should be a 1/4. Okay, so again, before I can put a number into this space over here, we have to take this 4 that we divided out and multiply it back up so we can get something to go here. So 4 times 1/4 is 1, which means I'm actually adding a 1 in these spaces. Okay, so you always have to distribute it back out before you can place it in that last blank. So now we can go ahead and do our shortcut. So our shortcut says we have something in parentheses, but this time we have that 4 out in front, so it just tags along. We do our variable, we do our half term, which is a -1/2, and then we add these last two numbers together, and that gives us a positive 4. So this would be the same equation that we started with, written in vertex form. And you can always check yourself by graphing the original function right here and graphing what we just got, and you should be getting the exact same graph. Looking at part B, so same concept. We start by adding in our spaces after the second term. So after the 12x, we add in a space. And then we add in our second space after the negative 13, the last number. Then we see that there's a greatest common factor in these first three terms right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to factor that out. That leaves us with an x squared plus 4x plus space, and then minus 13 minus space. So we take this middle term right here. We're going to cut it in half. So half of positive 4 is 2. Then we square it. And we get 2 squared, which is 4. So I put a 4 here. But then I have to remember I need to distribute this 3 back out. So 3 times 4 is 12. So it's a 12 that goes in these spaces right there. So now we can go ahead and do our shortcut where we factor. So we have something in parentheses squared. We remember that we have that 3 tagging along out in front. Then we use our variable x, our half term, which was a positive 2. And then we are going to add these last two numbers together. Negative 13 minus 12 is a negative 25. So we have that right there. Now we have our last example. If you want to pause the video and give it a try, go ahead and do so. So first thing we do is we add in our spaces after the second term and after the last term. Then we see that there is a greatest common factor, even though it doesn't look like it. So we are going to factor that out of the first 3 terms. So that means we have a 2 outside. That leaves me with an x squared minus a 5 over 2 x plus space. Then I still have my plus 1 minus space. I'm going to take this middle term and I am going to divide it by 2 and cut it in half. Okay, so this is what looks a little weird. So we have negative 5 over 2 divided by 2, which is really like a 2 over 1. Okay, so when you're dividing fractions, again, you could type that into your calculator, but if you're doing it by hand, you multiply by the reciprocal or you keep the numerator the same. You change to multiplication, you flip that denominator to 1/2, and you multiply straight across. Negative 5 times 1 is negative 5. 2 times 2 is 4. Then you square that number we just got. So squaring a negative 5 over 4. So negative 5 squared is 25. 4 squared is 16. So we have a 25 over 16 that goes in this spot. But before we can put it in any other spots, we have to make sure we multiply by 2. So 2 times 25 over 16. We see that the 2 can cancel out the 16 and make it an 8. So it leaves me with 25 over 8. Again, you could type that into the calculator if you wanted to. So now that we've done that, we can go ahead and do our shortcut for the factoring. So we have something in parentheses squared. We have that 2 hanging out in front. Then we have our variable. We're going to use our half term. Our half term was a negative 5/4. Then we're going to add these two numbers right here. So when I add them, they need a common denominator. So 1 would be 8 over 8 minus 25 over 8. So that allows me to have the denominator be the same. I subtract 8 minus 25 and I get a negative 17. So I have minus 17 over 8 here. It is the same equation as what I started with, just written in a different form. So if you have any questions over any of the completing by the square, make sure you write it down so you can ask me in class, and I will see you in the next video.